people here tonight to hear Don and Vickie. Just two things. Number one, who stole the first piece of the strawberry pie? That was supposed to be mine. Anyway, are there any of you here who had ancestors in the Civil War? One, two, three, four, five. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's about 8 or 9 people. Basically, I have found that most of the people who come into the museum, especially if they're from the Cedarville area, they know they've had ancestors in the Civil War. They know something about them, and you ask them, well, where were they, or what unit? They usually don't know the units. They fought at Shiloh, or they fought at Vicksburg, or something like that. Then you ask them, well, what do you know about Shiloh, or what do you know about Vicksburg? And that's where the conversation stops, because they know their ancestors in the Civil War. They might even know the unit, but they really don't know that much about what happened at the place where their ancestors were. So one of the things I've asked Don and Vickie to do tonight is to try to relate the Civil War and the events of the Civil War and the battles of the Civil War with its impact and on the people from Stevenson County. And he said he's owned up an awful lot in the last several weeks since I learned. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Don Franz.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much from my lovely wife Victoria and I for inviting us here tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, just to let you know real quick about our uniforms and our outfits. She has on a hoop skirt, and generally that would be used for a ball or some real nice outing to go to. Usually if you'd be working in the field, you would have a day dress and you wouldn't be wearing a boot. So it's not, it wasn't all like Scarlett O'Hara, you know, and Gone with the Wind type thing. She does have, if you notice, a cockade on her vest. It's a ribbon with a Union button in it. That is her allegiance to the North. They also had Confederate ones. You can still buy original ones. They're worth quite a bit of money, but that gives you your allegiance. I'm dressed as a musician.
Excuse me, Don, would you have her stand up?
Oh, okay, here's the
so that we can see all these wonderful things?
There. And actually, the bonnet is from the 1890s. That's an old bonnet. Yeah. She got a dress, the first dress was from the 1890s, a black one, and she fit in it. You know, I mean, it was real nice and everything, and we decided to buy a reproduction one rather than wear the original dress, so that's a nice dress. But the hat is really neat, too. So she helped me out a lot. I have to get a lot of support from her. My uniform is reproduced, of course. It's a musician's cage. I'm a musician in the infantry. I'll play some music at the end of the program for you on an original fife. And blue stood for infantry, yellow stood for cavalry, and the red stood for artillery. I do have a cavalry jacket up here with the yellow on it. I'm going to explain about how the war impacted the area here. Everything that you see here is original except the candles and the table. But I'm going to try and give you a lot of quick information and little tidbits of information that you might know or you might not know, that might find interesting. I usually do a talk on the common soldier of the war. The common soldier was not dumb. They were not north or south. It was a very dark time in history, and a lot of events led up to the Civil War. Kansas-Nebraska Act, even the Missouri Compromise, even bleeding Kansas, the fight in Kansas in the 1850s. They said the Civil War could have started in 1850 with Kansas because they were debating whether Kansas should come in as a free state or not. So anyway, without getting too much into the Civil War part and getting into the battle part, the real back-breaking thing was when Lincoln was elected president in 1860. And that's when on December 20th, South Carolina said we're going to secede and form our own union. A lot of patriotism at that time, a lot of patriotism around here. A lot of people went into the service. It was a great, joyous time. We would all the guys here would get together. We'd form our own company. I know your name is Tom. Thank you for coming from a long way to hear this. So, thank you, and you too, gentlemen. But we would let Tom, maybe our captain, Major over here, and Galen, our sergeant, maybe Bob, you could be our big leader too, We would all go together, and we would form a regiment. When we did form our regiments and sign up, we went to a place, now started in Stevenson County, at a place called Camp Scott for training. And Camp Scott was the site of Freeport High School today. And then they would be trained, shipped off, probably to possibly Chicago and off the war. In Cedarville alone, just Cedarville, there were 10 commissioned officers that came from Cedarville. There was 1 major, and there was 4 captains, and there was 5 first lieutenants just from Cedarville. There was even soldiers from the Red Oak area. Red Oak was in existence at that time. And there were 3 field officers that died during the Civil War from Stevenson County. And I can get into them a little bit later, but the first one was he wasn't the first one, but Colonel John Davis died on August 10th of 1862, and he's buried at Davis, of course. He was mortally wounded at Hatchie, Tennessee, and he died a few days later at Bolivar, Tennessee. The second individual was Colonel William Goddard. Goddard was a prevalent name in Lena. Major Goddard was killed at the Battle of Shiloh on April 6, 1862. He's buried in the Lena Cemetery. The third one to die, officer from Stevenson County, was Holden Putman. He died carrying an American flag at Tunnel Hill at the Battle of Missionary Ridge at Chattanooga, and he died on November 25th, 1863. He's buried in the city cemetery in Freeport. Colonel Davis belonged to the 46th Illinois. William Goddard belonged to the 15th Illinois. And Holden Putman belonged to the 93rd Illinois. And the 92nd Illinois was also from this area. 72% of the male population of Stevenson County signed up to go to the war. 72%. 50% of those sign-ups were in the 46th Illinois. So the war was on. They did their training and went together. Speaking from Stevenson County in this area, they actually were at Fort Henry, and the Battle of Fort Henry was February 6th of 1862. Fort Henry was on the Tennessee River. It was under the command of General Grant, and Grant had become made commander at that time. A lot of freezing rain that the men endured, a lot of cold weather. They had a battle at Fort Henry on that April 6th, and the Confederates evacuated the fort and went about 12 miles over the land to Fort Donelson. You hear a lot about Fort Donelson now instead of Fort Henry. Fort Donelson was on the Cumberland River. So that battle was fought right around the it would be Valentine's Day, February 14th of 1862, and the Confederates surrendered on February 16th, 1862. So there we were all together. Stevenson County was there, and it was actually the first major Union victory. We weren't doing too well up at that time. The Confederates were kind of beating us a little bit, but they had a lot of chivalry, a lot of good men, a lot of good horsemen. We didn't have a lot of good horsemen. But 15 where 12,000 to 15,000 Confederates surrendered to Grant. He became known as Unconditional Surrender Grant because the Confederates wanted to know what kind of conditions he was going to give out, and he said, Unconditional Surrender. So he got to be known as Unconditional Surrender Grant, or U.S. Grant. First major Union victory, big time, that was good for the country. And so, as a reward and thank you, Abraham Lincoln sent Grant 10,000 cigars. Now, Grant used to smoke a pipe. He started smoking a cigar, handed a cigar, now started smoking a cigar. Unfortunately, in 1885, when Grant just got done with his memoirs, he died of throat cancer. He smoked 18 cigars a day. He always had a cigar in his mouth. Sherman was the same way. And so anyway, so then that was the Battle of Fort Donelson on the Tennessee River. 2 months later, in April, 1862, April 6th, where Major Godwin was killed, was the Battle of Shiloh. Interesting about the Battle of Shiloh, it kind of started off kind of one tradition between the two armies. That was, if you take Shiloh for instance, the Confederacy or the Confederate Army or the South, whenever they would talk about a battle like Shiloh, they would call it Shiloh. The North called it Pittsburgh Landing. The Confederates always named the battles after a town or where they had their headquarters. The Union would name a battle after a landmark or a river. So you had out east, well, I'm talking about the war in the west because Stevenson County men fought the war in the west, and this was the Wild West. But even out east, the Battle of Sharpsburg, Maryland was the Battle of Antietam to the Yankees. Antietam Creek, Sharpsburg the town. In December of 1863, I believe, Battle of Murfreesboro to the Confederates, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. But there was Stones River going through there, and so to the Yankees it was the Battle of Stones River. So that's how some of those names got to mean the same battle. Another thing too interesting is the armies. The Confederate armies were named after the states, and the Yankee armies were named after the rivers. So General Lee's army was the Army of Northern Virginia. And there was also a Confederate Army, the Army of Mississippi. Now the difference is that's the state of Mississippi, not the Mississippi River. The little difference is with the Yankees, with the rivers, it was the Army of the Potomac. The is the magic word. Army of the Potomac. There was the Army of the James. We were the Army of the Cumberland. That was a river that Fort Donelson was on, and be in the west. And this forage cap is actually a French uniform and hat design, but the Western armies wore the brimmed hats and the slouch hats. So anyway, so then they fought at Shiloh, and of course the first day of Shiloh, the men were at Pittsburgh Landing and came up on the Shiloh church or onto the battlefield. There was claims they were routed by the rebels and they were bayoneted in their tents and all that. I don't think that really happened. They weren't taken by surprise a whole lot, but they were overrun. And the Yankees were scared. They ran back to Pittsburgh Landing. There's really a neat picture of the gunboats and the transports in Pittsburgh Landing, where on the Tennessee River. And if you ever go to Shiloh today, Shiloh is the one battlefield that is almost preserved the same as what it is today. And Pittsburgh Landing is a beautiful spot. There's so many beautiful spots on these battlefields, you can't imagine how much bloodletting there was at those places. It's a neat place to take a lounge chair and just sit there and watch the water. It's not very wide. General Grant was waiting for Don Carlos Buell, which was a Yankee in his army, to rejoin him, and he got lost, made a wrong turn. The maps back then were not the greatest thing that was around like they are today, so a lot of times the armies got going the wrong way. And they finally did show up, and on the 7th of April, they renewed the attack and won. One interesting thing about that battle is the Confederates had a general by the name of Ruggles, R-U-G-G-L-E-S. Ruggles Battery is down there today, the artillery, right by the Hornet's Nest. The Hornet's Nest is a small field, it's not as big as you think it is, to where they call it the Hornet's Nest, to where the bullets whiz back so fast it sounds like hornets going. And Ruggles had 21 cannons set up in line. Up to that point, that was the most artillery that had ever been brought together on the American continent. We won the Battle of Shiloh, and there were 23,000 casualties. Oh my gosh. The North was appalled with the casualty list. 23,000. Never in the history of the United States had there ever been a battle with 23,000 casualties. But that's what it was. And of course, they will get more than that later on. That was really nothing. So we did win at Shiloh. And so we were there. We did win that. That was an important battle in Tennessee. Same way with Fort Donelson and Fort Henry. Tennessee River, Cumberland River. They were main rivers in Tennessee, and Lincoln wanted control of those rivers because it was very important, because the transportation of troops and materials was rivers and railroads. And so when they got done with the Battle of Shiloh, the Confederates ran off to Corinth, Mississippi, which is in northern Mississippi, and which was a big railroad hub. We eventually took over Corinth, Mississippi. So anyway, so that would have to be in 1862, and actually another big battle that there was a lot of Illinois people involved at Shiloh. Sherman was actually there at Shiloh. There's a nice place to visit. Another place that everybody hears about is Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh, Mississippi. Pittsburgh was the last port on the Mississippi River, father of the water. When the war started, General Sherman was the head of Louisiana College. And he said before the war started, whoever controls the Mississippi River will win the war. And the Mississippi River was controlled from the north to the south, except Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was on a high piece of ground, commanded by the Confederates. And it was in 1863. Grant laid siege to the town for 47 days. General Pemberton was commander in Vicksburg. 30 miles away in Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital, General Joe Johnston had his army against Sherman. Grant and the 46th Illinois, and the Illinois troops were at Vicksburg. Pemberton, the Confederate, thought all the time that Johnston would reinforce him, but he never came. Sherman held him at bay. Between Jackson and Vicksburg, Mississippi, there's a big black river. Not real big. There was battles around the big black river. Another battle was Champion's Hill. Champion's Hill was an important battle between the two towns to keep Johnson away from reinforcing Pemberton. I do have a few things here. I like the Doug relics. I'm going to go back just a little bit because I knew I'd probably go back tonight. This is half of a U.S. buckle that's a skin. It got lead on the back, but there's no lead. This came from Shiloh. That was dug at Shiloh. So, as far as Champion Hill is concerned, we were down to Pittsburgh a few years ago. This is a gun barrel, musket barrel from Champion's Hill. Now my wife and I laugh about Champion's Hill because the Park Service has these battlefields, and the Park Service today does a great job, government-wide. It's great. See battlefields, you can walk on it. You can walk on the Andersonville battle. You can walk on the Andersonville prison compound, the 26 acres. You want to get goosebumps, you ought to go to Andersonville. But anyway, my wife and I, and she kids me about this today. We go out and we're looking for Champions Hill. You can't find it. Champions Hill is on the monument, along with Pittsburgh. Can't find it. There was a general that was killed there. He got a little monument of where he got killed. Never did see the monument. We're driving to Raymond, Mississippi, back and forth. Never found it. I finally read in a book, because I do a lot of reading. There's Champions Hill, but it's owned by the Champion family today. And so you can't go in and look at it. It's not a park. It's not a park. So they own the battlefield because it was on their land. So it was their ancestors. So their ancestors owned that land. 46 Illinois, and a lot of Illinois people, regiments were in Pittsburgh. Anybody been to Pittsburgh in here? Don't you love that Illinois monument? When you can see that Illinois monument down in Pittsburgh, it's huge. Got a dome. There are Southern people that come there to get married in front of that or get their wedding pictures taken in front of that monument. When you walk in there, it's huge in the dome, and there's names of all the Illinois people that are there. And you look up above, and this big name is Holman Putnam right at the top of that. He was a Pittsburgh. So he was also a Pittsburgh. The 26th, or the 46th Illinois Monument, I want to go find that. Well, a lot of the land, the Park Service sold back to Pittsburgh. So again, as usual, we drove around and we drove up this little 2-lane street, you know, on the little hill there in the residential. Go by this gas station, it looks like something out of a horror movie, you know. And up on this hill, there's a little monument. So you go behind the gas station, and here it is, 46 Illinois. Took a picture of it, and there it was. So, one interesting thing about Pittsburgh is the Yazoo Canal. You ever hear about the Yazoo Canal? Pittsburgh sits on the Mississippi, and it's got a bend in it. And then there sits Pittsburgh. General Grant thought if you cut a canal through there, there's a book written on it, cut a canal through there, he could get his troops below the city, and he would go through this canal and bypass Pittsburgh. Wouldn't have to go by the Confederates and Pittsburgh, because they could shoot down on the gunboats and make havoc. Anyway, it was so hot because it was in July, June and July. The town was sieged for 47 days in the summertime. They had slaves and soldiers and guys from Illinois regiments, probably the 46th, who digging this canal. And it was so hot, and the bugs and the flies and the mosquitoes, and everybody fell sick and everything. Finally they gave up on the program and quit after I don't know how long, weeks. This happens to be a Harper's Weekly, 1862, August. What's interesting about this is, if you look at it, you're welcome, you can come up and look at everything close. This is the digging of the Yazoo Canal. The ironic thing about it is, they gave up on the canal 20 years after the war was over. For some reason, the Mississippi took a little different turn in direction to where, like 3 miles below where they were digging, they busted out a new canal across that horseshoe. So that's kind of cool, you know. But General Pemberton, he surrendered the city on July 4th of 1863. July 3rd of 1863, if you remember, is Pickett's charge, Gettysburg. So the South surrendered, or the South lost the battle of Gettysburg, and then the day after that, Pittsburgh fell. Mississippi was open. People of the South said, "What is Pemberton doing? He's surrendering the city on the 4th of July, the birth of the nation's independence. Couldn't he hold out one more day?" And they said, "No, we're starving enough. We can't do it." realize this is how people in the South feel even today. The 4th of July was not celebrated in Pittsburgh for the next 85 years. The 85th year, this is only my own thought, was on 1945. And I think they started celebrating because of the end of World War II. But they never celebrated that. Well, then we had this. It was in 1863. Chickamauga, Georgia came along. It was a massive Confederate victory. And the Illinois regiments were there. It was September 19th, 1863. We got pushed back and we went into Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Missionary Ridge. Chattanooga sits in a hole in a valley today with Lookout Mountain, and it was also a railroad hub. The Confederates were sieging us now. They couldn't get food, anything like that, until we finally had what we called the cracker line. And that was away from the town to where they had a supply line across the river, Tennessee River, to supply the troops and everyone in Chattanooga. The Battle of Chattanooga, or the Battle of Lookout Mountain, or called the Battle above the Clouds, was November 24th and 25th of 1863. That's when Holden Putnam was killed carrying the flag at Tunnel Hill on top of Missionary Ridge. On the monument down here is a section about men from the 74th Illinois Company I. I used to be a member of that reactivated group, that's how I know this. The 74th Company, the 74th Illinois Regiment was Camp Fuller. They were in Rockford. They were out of Rockford. 74th Company I were guys from Stevenson County. The first flag to be put on top of Missionary Ridge, and that's way up there. That's a lot. That's really high. The first Union flag to be put on Missionary Ridge was by Corporal Hens, 74th Company I in Stevenson County. There's a monument to the 46th on Missionary Ridge. And General Thomas was a commander at that time, and he had his men down at the bottom in the Confederate rag, and the Confederates were up on Lookout Mountain, and he had a tin cup, and the whole story was he went like this or something like that with a tin cup, and the soldiers thought they were going to charge, and they had a race going up the hill, going up the ridge, going up the Missionary Ridge. And they overran the Confederates finally. And they said, well, they're running right back into Georgia. There they go. And so we actually won the Battle of Chattanooga. That was also a great railroad hub. It happened to be in November of 1863. Also, in 1864, the troops from this area were on the march with General Sherman on his march from Chattanooga, then where it started, to Atlanta, and then to the sea and up through the Carolinas. I have a newspaper here talking about Sherman's march to the sea. And what's interesting about that is it says, little headlines in the corner. The papers are really interesting to read. And in the headlines in the corner it says, Milledgeville is taken by Sherman, more or less. Milledgeville was the capital of Georgia at that time and not Atlanta. So he took the capital of Milledgeville. Atlanta was actually named after the mayor's daughter. And so a lot of Illinois troops were with Sherman on his march to the sea. I have General Sherman's autograph here with me. They went through they started off in Chattanooga. They went to Kingston, Georgia, Altoona Pass. I believe Altoona Pass is out here. They battled all the way down. When they first started out, one of General Sherman's big mistakes was Kennesaw Mountain. And that's a park service today, and that was a slaughter for many of the Illinois men and many of the soldiers. The Confederates were up on the mountain, and he thought that with many men and everything they had, they would just bluntly go right at them, and it didn't work out that way. That was actually Sherman's mistake. General Grant's mistake, I'll get off the line a little bit. General Grant's mistake, which I have a ramrod from Cold Harbor, which was out east, was one of the battles to take Richmond. He made a frontal assault on heavy Confederate lines and lost 7,000 guys in 5 days. He lost 7,000 guys in 20 minutes. That's when he became known as Butcher Grant. That was his mistake. But anyway, Sherman made his march to the sea. He took Atlanta, took Savannah. Many of the Illinois men could hardly wait to get to Savannah. Man, we're going to hardly wait to get them oysters out of there. And there were ships waiting in Savannah with supplies and everything. And Sherman had 60,000 of the best men with him. But when he took off from Atlanta, he sent the bad ones back. And, the sick ones and the wounded ones, they had the prime 60,000 guys. Made a 60-mile wide path down to Savannah. They then went up into South Carolina. We are going to make South Carolina pay for this because they're the first ones that seceded. We're going to make them pay. They think Georgia how we're going to make them really pay for it, and he did. And they thought that he was going to take Charleston, but he didn't. He bypassed that. He kind of faked it, and he bypassed it and went up to Columbia. A lot of controversy on Columbia burning. A lot of them, I think, basically it was a lot of wind, and the Confederates burnt the cotton that was there, and the cotton went on fire, and a lot of cotton and stuff going around. There was a lot of Union soldiers, a lot of Illinois men actually helped put out fires. They got up to, they started going on. When they got done with Columbia, they started going into North Carolina, and they more or less said, "Okay, guys, you made South Carolina pay, so we're going to kind of take it easy on North Carolina." Because North Carolina was the last one to go to secede. So they did it. And while he was in North Carolina on April 9th of 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Atkins. And there were the Union soldiers and the Illinois soldiers were with Sherman. They were after Joe Johnson then in the Carolinas, and by Durham Station, he called Johnson, and Johnson wanted to talk about surrender terms, and right by Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So Johnson surrendered to General Sherman on the 26th of April. That morning, Sherman got word that Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And he was concerned about how the troops were going to take that news, and so he kind of kept it from him. But Johnson somehow knew about it, and when he went to the surrender term, he said Johnson was sweating because he thought they were going to land south. There's a lot of controversy on that. I've done a lot of reading on the assassination and Booth. It's really interesting stuff. One person that is buried out here at the cemetery, at the city cemetery, is a colonel of the 92nd Illinois by the name of Smith Atkins. Smith Atkins was with Sherman, and he was a colonel in the 92nd Illinois, and he was with Sherman when Johnson surrendered. When that began, part of going back to being there. He's buried in the cemetery. He fell in love with Eleanor Swan, who was a rebel and somebody that lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He brought her back here. Oh, a lot of controversy about you bringing a Southern woman over here and you want to marry her, and they got married. And he became one of the chief editors, I can't tell you when, of the Freeport paper. And his picture, the only picture I've seen of him, is in the first Polaris of Freeport in 1896. He was on the school board. And his gravestone today is this wide, that high, and about yay thick. And what that was used at the Freeport paper, used to fold the papers around that stone. And they used that as his marker. So Smith Atkins married Eleanor. I haven't seen Eleanor Swan's grave out there. I can't tell you. Smith Atkins was instrumental on the design of the monument in Freeport. He needed $6,000, they only raised $3,000. He footed the other $3,000 more or less, and it was his design. It was erected in 1869 and dedicated in 1870. And I'll be truthful with you. I'll give you a little secret about what I've been doing. I have, and if somebody knows the answer to this, let me know. I've been looking and looking and looking to see how many names are on the monument, and I can't find out. And I went through 100 pages of Freeport on the internet the other night, and I didn't find any. It's always says the names on all four sides. But Vickie, who stood on top of the monument, and you remember Vickie that stood on top of the monument, that was struck on October 1st of 1960. My dad and I were standing in the backyard when that hit. That at that time was 13 feet high. That was the highest statue of the time at that time in the United States. So, so there was a lot of men in the regiments. The Civil War touched every family in the United States, every family in Stevenson County. Letters and diaries survived. And the carnage was so great, 620 to 640,000 men died. For every one man died in battle, 4 died in disease in camp. Sometimes disease would wipe almost the whole regiment out. Some figure-wise, the northern states had 22 million people. Southern states had 9 million. 4 million of those were slaves. 2% owned slaves. And the carnage of 620,000 was 2% of the population. So by today's standards, that would be like a war with 4 to 5 million people perishing today. Only 4 million people voted in the re-election of Lincoln. So monuments were built, cemeteries were brought into being to respect the soldiers, the national cemeteries. Philip Sheridan, the 5'2" great cavalryman, is buried right in General Lee's front yard in Arlington. They took over General Lee's house in Arlington, and of course the war dead were so many, the cemetery started to fill up, and he said, we'll make sure that Lee never comes back to his house. And they put the first bodies from Bull Run. Bull Run is a river and the name of the Yankee battle, and Manassas is the town, Manassas, what the Confederates called it. They buried the first soldiers from Manassas in Mrs. Lee's garden. So they were certainly wouldn't think. He only saw it once, and he was going by train to Washington. So, I think that's about all the statistics, the little figures I have for you. I've got a lot of artifacts here. I said I would play a tune for you or two. Then I'm going to take questions at the end. If anybody's got any questions, you're welcome to come up. I usually do a common soldier display thing. I've got hardtack here that my lovely wife bought me. Everything is original except the table here and the candles. One really neat fact, I got to tell another little fact, is when you look at this stuff, right here on the table is John Sherman's autograph, a picture of John Sherman, and a letter by John Sherman. John Sherman was William T. Sherman, March to the Sea's brother. And he was a big congressman at that time, and through the Civil War, was in the Senate. And he appropriated a bill called the Sherman Antitrust Act. That meant, even back then, no company can monopolize over another one or have a monopoly over anybody else or anything like that. Do you realize that that bill is still on the book today, to where I was watching TV one night and they performed the Sherman Antitrust Law on Bill Gates and Microsoft. So that law is still in existence today. Well, things came out of the Civil War that we still have today. Every one of them affected. You go into any cemetery, you see GAR on the gravestones. That was a veteran of the Union Army, Grand Army of the Republic. It was like a forerunner to the Veterans of Foreign War. The South had theirs, the SCV, the Southern Confederate Veterans. Over here, if you look real close, I do have a couple things here. GAR pieces after the war. The groups would get together, then we would all get together, invite our generals or our commanders. This one happened to be a reunion ribbon from Lena in 1900. And ironically, this is made out of leather. It's from a 1910 GAR. It's Mr. E.J. Wilson from Red Oak. That's really unique. In this case, I have GAR things from 1910. None of this stuff came from Illinois. Philip Hayes was the commander at that time. These were medals that they might have worn. This is a postcard from Iowa showing them walking east on Stevenson Street from Walnut Street in front of the City Hall. 1910, and this is a program that a man made a speech about General Lee. In this folder, the mayor of Freeport is Raleigh. And Raleigh was only mayor of Freeport 1 year. So that's kind of interesting. But they did have GAR, they had functions. I have General Sherman's autograph here on the letter that was written by the United States, very nice handwriting, and he signed it, and the envelope is addressed to a mayor in Dubuque, Iowa, asking him to come to a meeting, but he refused to come. I've got a lot of artifacts here. How am I doing for time?
You're fine.
Everybody doing okay? I'm okay, I get it all. I can go into the display here a little bit.
Do you have the one article up there that says Abraham Lincoln, but not Abraham Lincoln? It's a different Abraham?
Yeah. Did you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a grocery receipt here. Kids like this in school. 1833 grocery receipt that shows about flour and everything signed Abraham Lincoln. There were 7 Abraham Lincolns during the Civil War up to that point. So it's not the Abraham Lincoln's autograph. His signature is worth about $40,000. This happened to be Sherman's autograph. I have a Rockford paper, October issue 1861 of Rockford paper. They're in plastic, so you're welcome to pick them up and look at them. Same way with the pictures. I like the pictures. Yes, we got a quick question.
Maybe interesting. I've got my Greek Uncle Benjamin's Civil War discharge paper.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
That's nice to have.
And a lot of his correspondence. You see about getting his pension and stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice to have that. I don't have any relation in the Civil War. You know, I have a lot of people come and tell me, I got this and I got that. That's great. I don't have any relation. But I do have a lot of things. I got, this happens to be the hardtack and the food. And this is what made out of flour and water and salt. This is what Sherman actually liked hardtack. They used to boil it. They used to dunk it in coffee. They used to fry it in bacon grease to get the worms out of it. Some of the other gruesome thing, another gruesome thing I have from Fredericksburg, Virginia, is a dead man's bayonet. This is dug out of the ground. The body's laid for several days on the battlefield after 4 attempts against a stone wall. The Union charged the stone wall about 4 times. It was actually a slaughter. And without going into detail about the battle, actually Joshua Chamberlain, the hero of Gettysburg on Ground Top, he was wounded and he was laying on the battlefield at Fredericksburg and used a dead soldier as a pillow for his head until the morning came and started to snow and everything. It got pretty cold because it was December 13th of 1863. This is a dead man's bayonet. They usually broke pretty good. It had to be heated or something. It was either used to hold a pot or, very in detail, they didn't want to touch the bodies because they would be swollen and black. So they would hook it underneath the belt and lower their comrade into the grave. So this could have been used and just thrown aside. I do have Confederate money. Confederate money inflated 400%. They printed $1 billion of Confederate money. What's really interesting, they had hundreds of young ladies signing the bills, so each one is hand signed. When Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater, they went through his pockets. He had several things in his pockets. He had two pairs of spectacles, a pocket knife, 7 clips from the newspaper about different things, and he had a Confederate $5 bill. That Confederate $5 bill looked like this one here. It was this style. You had different states and banks printing money. I also have here, and I just acquired these two here. This happens to be a Bank of Louisiana money. This is the only United States money I have, but the Bank of Louisiana. Everything was states' rights. One illustration about states' rights was today, I took a Civil War class in Ireland here not too long ago. A teacher said, how many people would fight for Illinois? You know, today. But it was states' rights, states. It was a union. And it was a union of states. And shortly before Virginia seceded from the Union, Abraham Lincoln asked General Lee if he would take command of all the Union Army. And Lee said, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be capable of doing that. And I got to wait to see if my state goes first. Well, a few days later, Virginia seceded. That was after Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 troops and really made the upper South mad, and the rest of them all seceded with Tennessee and you know. But anyway, so General Lee says, I have to go with my state. So he went with the state of Virginia. The interesting thing about the strong feeling of the states' rights, is General Lee gave up 40 years of service, and he fought for 2 things he did not believe in. He didn't believe in secession, and he didn't believe in slavery. And Jefferson Davis had 100 slaves. He couldn't see what was wrong with slavery. I treat them like my own children, like my own. I give them my best medical care. I call my own doctors in. I treat them like my own kids. What are you talking about slavery being bad? And Jefferson Davis never could see that slavery was a bad thing. And he took care of his 100. You know, if a baby was being born, a slave child was going to call in his best doctor, and they were fed well. He lived down in Mississippi. Right now, where he used to live, that plantation is the Mississippi again. Took another trek, and it's all filled in with water. Anyway, so I've one other real quick thing, and I'll play a song. There's I learned this down in Pittsburgh in the old Capitol building. The old Capitol building that the Confederates took over, or that the Yankees took over from the Confederates, it still stands today. Real nice museum. I have been interested in the Civil War for 47 years. Do a lot of reading all the time. Get a lot of support from my lovely wife. And you never know everything. I tell this to kids at the school. I always thought that if a Confederate lost his belt buckle and he found a Yankee one, he turned it upside down. Well, if you turn it upside down, it means, hey, I'm going to defy the United States. It's upside down. You know, how do you like that? Actually, when we got down there, it was up. They had a buckle upside down explaining what it was. Now, holler it out loud so they can. What letters are those? What letters are those?
That's you.
SN. It's SN. Upside down is SN. That stands for Southern Nation. I never knew it. So you see, you can learn. So I have some other things. So you might see that upside down. That's the reason why. So you can come up and look, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. I'll wet my whistle here pretty soon and play a tune on the fight. I have 2 of them here. This is the original fife. What's interesting about it, if there's any musicians here, they'll appreciate it. There's a cork in here. And that cork is moved back and forth to tune the fife in the key of B flat, but you never have to tune it, but it's always a tune. The thing about it is, after 147 years, the cork is still good. And somebody had played this a lot, because you see a lot of the varnish has gone out of the hole, fingering holes have varnish gone. I had an individual look at this, he thought it was maybe before the Civil War, but it plays real nice. I also have a Crosby fife that was made in Boston. That's a little harder to find. One thing it'll sound like a joke, but it's not, that the further away it gets, the better it sounds. You know? What you hear here is it'll be loud and shrill. And if it gets too loud for anybody, raise your hand, I'll stop, because it is shrill. But you hear air, it's an airy thing, and it's a fife, it's not a piccolo. Piccolos are smaller. There's no keys. You hear air, and it'll be kind of not real smooth, but if you played that across the street, it would be just as clear as a bell, and it sounds better. Well, the further away you get, the better it sounds. Musicians, they were boys mainly, 12, 14 years old. Johnny Clem was 12 years old. I just saw a CDV of Johnny Clem for sale for about $300. He was a drummer boy at Shiloh, had his drum blown away from him, and he picked up a musket and started shooting. In Chickamauga, which you heard earlier, he had another drum blown away from him, and picked up a musket and started shooting. He went through the war and became a career man in the Army, and he retired an old man from the career, Johnny Clem. There was a lot of boy musicians, drummers, fifers, buglers. Music played an important role. It kept the spirits of the troops up. Camp calls on the fife with a tune playing to the colors when they hoist the colors up. But yet there is drum roll, drum calls for assembly. Men on the march would march to the tune of fifes and drums on both sides. So there was a lot of boy musicians. So I will play one of my favorite songs, and then I have a cute little story about that song. And that's another little tidbit. But I gotta wet my whistle here. I had this individual say I'm drinking from plastic. You know, I got a canteen at home, I know that. I will take the gentleman's advice, and I have a canteen at home. You always learn. This happens to be the Battle Hymn Republic. And I like this tune, so if it gets too loud for anybody, let me know. This is on an original fife. One of my favorites, and I can say I got a cute story. Are you ready? Story, pardon me?
It's just the high.
I know. The fife is played one octave higher than what the music is written. If you played it the way the music's written, it wouldn't sound like that at all. So it's an octave higher. The interesting story is, in 1862, at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., Juliet Ward Howe was in the room at the hotel. Willard was a famous hotel in Washington. And she happened to look out late in the day and saw the Army of the Potomac, the Union Army of the Potomac at the river, march by. At one time, the Army numbered 125,000 men. It was an Eastern Army, and a lot of men from New York. New York was one state that contributed the most men. They were members of the Irish Brigade, 69th New York, 116th Pennsylvania. They were all Irish, Germans, all kinds, and from the eastern states. She saw the Army of the Potomac march by. She was so impressed by that vision. She went to bed that night, and she woke up the next morning and had the verse in her mind. The song is actually the song of John Brown's Body. John Brown's Body lies molded in the grave. I know I don't sing. Now, so she wrote it down on paper. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. She wrote it down. She wrote the words of Battle Hymn Republic. A little later on, she sold it to the Atlantic Monthly Magazine for $4. No rights, no nothing. Compared to today, to make some comparisons, that's about 23,000 today. When John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln, he was a rich actor. A slave, a male slave, cost $1,000 to $1,200 back in the Civil War, before the Civil War. By today's standards, that'd be like buying a slave for $40,000. Booth, before he ended his acting career and decided to do what he was going to do, he would play at the different various big cities, and he got to be pretty famous. They always thought his brother was a little better actor, but he was starting to get up there. He played, Othello and Julius Caesar and all this. And he was making anywhere within a 5-day period run of between $300 to $900 a week. So I figured he must be making about $20,000 a week. The Yankee soldier, the Yankee private from Illinois made $11 a month. With the Emancipation Proclamation, it didn't really free the slave, the 13th Amendment did, but he was discriminated against and got $9 a month. Ironically, another little tidbit of information, black Navy man, an African-American black Navy man, was not discriminated against. The Navy didn't discriminate. He got the same amount of money. And later on, a bill was introduced where they did pay the African-American the same price. 178,000 African-Americans fought for the Union. 40,000 were dead. Sometimes the whole Navy crew would be black from the African-American. They proved to be real fighters. They were in the crater of Petersburg. That was a mess. So anyway, would you like to hear one more little tune and then you can have okay. Sorry, Mrs. Bergman. This here, now this gets pretty high too. I'll try and keep it down. I always say that now, it was also for entertainment. You didn't fight all the time, you weren't battled all the time. There was winter encampments, got boring. Guys would play cards, they would bet on, cavalry would bet on horses. And they would also put on plays where men would dress up like damsels in distress, and they put on plays and different plays. They also had music. And they would Irish jig or jig around the campfires. They would dance. The music was sad, solemn. Home Sweet Home would make 10,000 guys cry at a time. Marching Through Georgia, which Sherman hated after a while. That's a good song. Rally Around the Flag, later on in the war, that's a great song. But this one here, if you can imagine while I play it just for a moment, I always say, imagine at night, you got a hillside of campfires, maybe 10,000 campfires. And then you hear a lone fifer boy playing Minstrel Boy. And Minstrel Boy is an Irish jig to where guys will jig around the fire. And so this is Minstrel Boy, and it's an Irish jig. It was written by Patrick Gilmore. This is a pretty famous tune too. Everybody doing okay here? I think I've covered just about anything. It's usually something I always forget or anything. Anybody got any questions? I'll start over here and I'll go this way so that everybody gets a chance. I'll try and answer everybody's question if I can. Mr. Birkenfeld.
Well, Don, you said you were interested in Civil War for 44 or 47 years.
Right.
What got you so interested in the Civil War? I've never heard anybody talk so much about the Civil War. So, what got you so interested and how you got all of this knowledge?
Thank you. Did you hear the question? I had to talk about myself now. Got interested in the 8th grade when we were in junior high. We graduated high school together. In 8th grade, remember Mr. Howard? I asked for a picture of a cavalry picture with arrows and a horse and the Indians were charging. And I became interested in that. And it was Mr. Howard's history class, but it was also 1961. It was the year of the Civil War centennial. So I became interested in it then. Chicago paper ran comics, and every Saturday or every Sunday had a comic about the Civil War. I always read the Civil War comics. I had a lot of the cardboard hats. At that time, 1959, the Horse Soldiers came out. John Wayne movie, The Horse Soldiers. My brother went to that 11 times at the movie theater. He's a retired school teacher now. I saw it once. I have the DVD. I've seen it so many times, I know the movie by that. And so that kind of got me going. I was 13 years old, and I started reading. And like I tell the kids in school, I didn't go to college for that. I'm a tool and die maker at Micro. And I read all the time. I read Civil War all the time. I know. I started a book on slavery now, and I got 3 in the mail today on one on Mary Surratt, the hangings and the assassinations. I got 3 more on that. So I'm always reading. I got about 400 books by. I'm self-taught. That's the way Lincoln was. Lincoln was a self-made man. He was self-taught. He was self-taught in the military, where Jefferson Davis was in the Mexican War, along with Grant and Lee and all them guys. They all went to West Point together. They knew what each one was going to do. I went with Galen and Bob. I know how they're going to attack me. Bob's not going to, and Galen will. And that's how they did that, though, and knew each other in the war. But Lincoln did not know any of that. He kind of he was a self-made.
I'm pretty sure there's a black soldier buried right down here at Manning Cemetery near between Lena and Pound.
Probably, could be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we discovered that.
Yeah. You realize there are 3 Confederates buried in Lena Cemetery, and they put Confederate flags on their grave. There's Confederates buried in Lena Cemetery. But yeah, there probably is. Oh, I'm sure they should get the respect that they do. They're soldiers. Yeah. There were some blacks for a very short time. See, the war ended in April, and for a very short time, or in March, the South tried to enlist blacks to fight for the South. And if you fight for the South, we'll give you some land, and you'll be a free man. But it never really materialized. They had some blacks. I've seen some pictures of blacks or Native Americans or African Americans in Confederate uniform. But it never. It takes. You just don't do it overnight. It takes a little time to get it going. So, yeah, they proved to be very good soldiers. Very good soldiers. Okay, just hang on. Yeah, Mitford.
Oh, I'm just wondering why these Confederate people were buried in the Lena Cemetery.
I don't know.
Did somebody from here go and fight in the South?